There were no screams when the collapse began, no armies crossing borders, no towers falling into clouds of ash. The first signs were almost invisible, buried beneath routine, comfort, and the dangerous illusion that stability was permanent. Markets still opened every morning. Families still gathered around dinner tables. Governments still delivered speeches promising order and continuity. Across the great cities of history, from Rome to Constantinople, from the streets of Paris to the factories of collapsing industrial states, ordinary people continued living as if tomorrow would arrive exactly as it always had. But beneath the surface, systems were already weakening. Roads stopped being repaired, trust in institutions quietly eroded, prices rose just enough for people to complain, but not enough to panic. And perhaps that was the most terrifying part of every collapse in human history. The warning signs were almost never hidden. They were simply ignored, until the moment ignoring them was no longer possible. Long before empires fractured, daily life often appeared strangely normal. In the final centuries of the Roman Empire, crowded markets still overflowed with merchants selling wine, grain, oil, and cloth, beneath towering marble monuments that projected eternal strength. Citizens gathered in bathhouses discussing politics, entertainment, and rumors from distant provinces, while soldiers still guarded city gates, wearing polished armor beneath imperial banners. But behind the appearance of continuity, deeper fractures were spreading through every layer of society. Farms produced less food after years of exhaustion and poor harvests. Corruption hollowed out local administrations. Taxes became unbearable, forcing entire populations into debt and dependency. Meanwhile, the wealthy insulated themselves behind estates and private guards, growing disconnected from the suffering surrounding them. Yet most people adapted, instead of resisting. Human beings are capable of normalizing extraordinary instability for astonishing lengths of time. And by the time shortages, insecurity, and fear became impossible to ignore, the foundation beneath civilization had already begun to crack. One of the most consistent signs of collapse throughout history has been the slow decay of public trust. Not dramatic rebellion at first, but exhaustion. Citizens begin to lose faith in leaders, institutions, and even each other. In late imperial societies, promises become repetitive while conditions continue worsening. Officials insist the crisis is temporary. Economists claim recovery is imminent. Military victories are exaggerated. But ordinary people notice smaller details that reveal a darker reality. Bread becomes more expensive. Infrastructure quietly deteriorates. Crime increases after sunset. Entire neighborhoods grow abandoned, while elites continue celebrating inside protected districts. During the final decades before the French Revolution, peasants watched nobles host extravagant banquets while entire communities struggled to survive failed harvests and brutal taxation. The anger did not explode overnight. It accumulated silently through humiliation, inequality, and the growing realization that those in power no longer understood the reality outside palace walls. History repeatedly shows that collapse rarely begins with a single catastrophe. It begins with systems becoming too fragile to absorb pressure. Ancient civilizations survived wars, droughts, plagues, and political corruption for centuries because their institutions could still adapt under stress. But eventually, resilience disappears. In the final years of the Soviet Union, supermarket shelves emptied gradually, while official propaganda continued describing national strength and prosperity. Citizens waited in endless lines for basic supplies, while government broadcasts projected confidence and control. Factories became inefficient, local corruption spread uncontrollably, entire industries survived only through deception and falsified production reports. Yet for years, millions continued believing the system would somehow stabilize itself. The collapse did not arrive like an explosion. It arrived through slow paralysis. By the time the state could no longer maintain the illusion of order, public confidence had already evaporated beyond repair. Environmental stress has also stood behind some of history's most devastating collapses, though societies rarely recognized the danger until survival itself was threatened. Ancient Mesopotamian kingdoms exhausted agricultural land through overuse and poor irrigation, allowing salt to poison fertile soil over generations. The Mayan civilization experienced prolonged droughts that destabilized cities dependent on fragile water systems. On Easter Island, forests disappeared slowly, tree by tree, until the island could no longer sustain its population or build the vessels necessary for fishing and migration. But no civilization destroys itself in a single decision. Environmental collapse often unfolds invisibly across decades, hidden beneath short-term survival and political distraction. Leaders prioritize immediate stability while ignoring long-term consequences. Resources become harder to access, food grows more expensive, migration increases, violence follows scarcity. And even then, societies frequently refuse to change course because acknowledging the danger would require admitting that the system itself had become unsustainable. There is another pattern hidden inside almost every major collapse: the widening separation between elites and ordinary people. As instability grows, those with wealth and power often become increasingly isolated from the conditions affecting the rest of society. In the final years before the Russian Revolution, aristocrats attended lavish social gatherings inside illuminated halls, while workers crowded into freezing factories and overcrowded housing districts. In ancient Rome, senators debated philosophy while frontier defenses weakened and entire provinces descended into unrest. The illusion of permanence protects ruling classes from recognizing danger until it becomes uncontrollable. And when elites stop understanding the daily struggles of the population, societies lose their ability to respond collectively to crisis. Resentment spreads quietly at first, then trust disappears. Finally, institutions themselves begin to look illegitimate. By the time governments attempt meaningful reform, public anger has usually hardened into something far more dangerous. Economic instability has always carried a psychological effect far beyond numbers or markets. Inflation, unemployment, and scarcity slowly transform how people behave toward one another. In Weimar Germany during the 1920s, hyperinflation became so severe that families carried money in baskets just to buy bread. Workers rushed to spend wages within hours because prices could double by evening. Savings accumulated over lifetimes became worthless almost overnight. But perhaps the most destructive consequence was not financial ruin itself. It was the collapse of social trust. Neighbors became competitors for survival. Fear replaced optimism. Extremist ideologies gained strength because desperate populations often search for certainty inside chaos. History demonstrates again and again that economic collapse is never merely about currency. It changes the emotional architecture of society. And once fear dominates daily life, rational stability becomes increasingly difficult to restore. Pandemics have also revealed how fragile civilizations truly are beneath their appearance of permanence. During the Black Death in the 14th century, entire European cities descended into terror as disease spread faster than institutions could respond. Streets fell silent except for funeral carts carrying bodies toward mass graves. Markets closed. Religious certainty fractured. Families abandoned sick relatives out of fear. But even before the plague arrived, warning signs already existed. Overcrowded cities, poor sanitation, malnutrition, and weak medical understanding created ideal conditions for catastrophe. Yet societies ignored vulnerabilities because daily routine creates the illusion that disaster belongs only to distant places or future generations. When collapse finally emerges through disease, famine, or war, populations often react with disbelief first. Human beings are psychologically resistant to accepting that the structures organizing their world may no longer function tomorrow. Communication breakdown becomes another unmistakable sign that collapse is accelerating. In stable societies, information generally flows with enough reliability for institutions to coordinate action and maintain public confidence. But during periods of decline, truth itself becomes fragmented. Rumors spread faster than facts. Governments manipulate narratives to preserve authority. Citizens retreat into fear, suspicion, and tribal thinking. During the final years of Yugoslavia before violent fragmentation, propaganda intensified ethnic divisions, while political leaders exploited historical grievances to consolidate power. Communities that had lived beside one another for generations suddenly viewed neighbors as existential threats. The collapse did not begin with open warfare, it began with language becoming weaponized and trust dissolving between ordinary people. Once societies lose a shared understanding of reality, cooperation weakens rapidly, and without cooperation, even advanced civilizations can descend toward chaos with terrifying speed. Perhaps the most haunting feature of historical collapse is how ordinary it feels while it is happening. People still wake up, go to work, care for families, and make plans for the future, even as the structures supporting their lives begin to fail. During the decline of once powerful empires, many citizens never fully realized they were witnessing collapse in real time. There was no official announcement declaring that history had entered irreversible decline. Instead, there were only accumulating inconveniences, anxieties, shortages, and uncertainties that slowly transformed everyday existence. The roads became less safe, the currency lost value, institutions stopped functioning consistently, violence became more common, hope became harder to sustain. But no one moment felt dramatic enough to define as the end, and that gradual normalization of instability may be one of humanity's most dangerous psychological weaknesses. Even after civilizations collapse, traces of denial often survive until the very end. Leaders continue issuing confident declarations, citizens cling to familiar routines, entire populations convince themselves recovery is inevitable because imagining total systemic failure feels psychologically unbearable. In the final days before the fall of Constantinople in 1453, religious ceremonies continued beneath cathedral domes, while Ottoman cannons shattered ancient walls outside the city. During the final phase of the Titanic disaster, many passengers initially refused evacuation because the ship itself symbolized technological invincibility. Human beings struggle to recognize irreversible decline because civilizations teach their populations to believe permanence is natural. But history offers a far colder lesson. No empire, economy, political system, or society remains immune to collapse forever. Stability is never permanent. It is temporary balance maintained through trust, adaptation, and resilience. What makes these stories unsettling is not simply that civilizations collapse. It is that people living through them often believe they were too advanced, too powerful, or too organized for failure to reach them. Every era creates its own mythology of permanence. Ancient Romans believed their empire represented eternal order. Industrial powers believed technology guaranteed endless progress. Financial systems promised infinite growth. Political institutions claimed absolute stability, yet history repeatedly demonstrates that collapse does not discriminate between primitive societies and advanced civilizations. Complexity itself can become vulnerability. The more interconnected systems become, the more fragile they may grow beneath pressure. And when enough stress accumulates at once, economic, environmental, political, social, collapse can accelerate faster than anyone expects. In the end, the warning signs were almost always visible long before disaster arrived. Crumbling infrastructure, distrust in institutions, extreme inequality, resource exhaustion, political paralysis, rising extremism, economic fragility, social fragmentation. These patterns appear again and again across centuries like echoes repeating through history. But civilizations rarely recognize collapse while it is still preventable, because acknowledging the danger would require confronting uncomfortable truths about power, consumption, and human behavior itself. And so societies continue forward, convincing themselves that decline is temporary, manageable, reversible, until one day the systems people depended upon no longer respond. The lights stop turning on, the food stops arriving, the government loses control, the illusion disappears, and by the time the signs become impossible to ignore, history has already crossed the point of no return.